Good morning, Father's House. Thank you for joining us once again on our Sunday morning video service. It's actually Saturday for us though, because we filmed the day before. But again, thank you for joining us. We love to hear the feedback that you guys provide from the videos, so continue to share that. Just a couple of things I wanted to go over before Pastor Carl comes up. Men's meeting has started up again on Zoom on Monday nights at 6:30. If you want to be part of that, let Pastor Carlos or Pastor Carl know, and they can get you hooked up on that. They're going through the book of Romans. The ladies group is still meeting on Zoom on Thursday nights at 6:30. We had a couple of people come back and join us again, so we had a really good time on Thursday, a really good time of sharing and discussion. We are going through the book of Proverbs, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. Also, today is Mission Sunday, so if you would like to give to the Father's House your regular tithe and offering, and or to the mission over in Argentina or in India, I know those would be greatly appreciated. I know those missions are struggling just a little bit, so any giving extra, little, whatever is greatly appreciated. You can go to thefathershouse.org and click on the giving button, not the sermon button, but the giving button. And you can set it up to give a one-time gift or a recurring gift to the Father's House and to missions. If you don't use the internet or feel uncomfortable on the internet, let me know I'll let you know it's very safe on the internet. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can mail a check to the Father's House, 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Check or money order, actually, or cashier's check. Also, if you live in the area and you would like Pastor Carl or I to come by and pick up your tithe and offering, we would be happy to do that. And please know we will social distance. We'll be very good about that. If you wanted to join us for our Sunday morning outside service, we are still continuing that as long as the weather holds. And tomorrow, or this morning, whichever the case may be, it's supposed to be 73 outside. So I'm hoping that we have a pretty good turnout. The worship team has worked hard to make a beautiful worship service for the church, as they normally do, as they always have, but to do it outside just took a little bigger challenge, and they have totally stepped up to it. So praise and worship is wonderful. Also, they have suggested, and we have purchased an FM transmitter. So if you want to come to service and sit in your car, all you do is tune your radio to 92.7 most of the time. We let you know in the morning if that changes, but then you can sit in the comfort of your car and listen to the message. If you want to be out in the sunshine, bring your lawn chair, bring your mask, we'll social distance and have a good time. So going to the book of Proverbs, Pastor Mario's group challenged us, and the women have been going through it, and I challenged the Father's House group to go through the book of Proverbs, to read one chapter each day, because there's 31 days in January, 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs, and really just spend some time reading, and then spend some time in prayer and see what God has for you personally for 2021 and what God has for the Father's House for 2021. So we've been doing that each day as another form of worship, because if you're at home and sheltered in place and you're like me, you don't want to sing to praise and worship. So you come up with other ideas and alternatives. And this month it has been to read your Bible. You can also spend some time in prayer. You can read a devotional. Whatever the case may be, to spend some quiet time alone with God. So we've been going through a chapter a day, and today is the 16th. You're watching this on the 17th. So what I'm going to do is start with the 16th chapter, because 16 through 22 goes through Proverbs encouraging godly lives. So I'll start on 16. Hopefully you finished it yesterday, and then you can go through 17 through 22 as the days progress this week. So chapter 16, Proverbs encouraging godly lives. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord weighs the motives. Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its own purpose, even the wicked for the day of evil. Everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Assuredly, he will not be unpunished. But the loving kindness and truth iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord one keeps away from evil. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Better is a little with righteousness than a great income with injustice. The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. A divine decision is in the lips of the king. His mouth should not err in judgment. A just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. It is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established on righteousness. Righteous lips are the delights of kings, and he who speaks right is loved. So I stopped at verse 13. You can pick up at verse 14 and continue throughout this week going through the different chapters. Thank you for letting me share just a little bit, and we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl now.
Well, good morning. How are you today? I trust you're having a great day again. It's a beautiful sunshiny day here in Northern California. Like Penny said, it's going to be 73 or 74 today. I want to tell you, that's surfing weather. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some people are out surfing, or at least some of our people from our congregation. They might be out fishing today, and if that's the case, they're going to be in trouble because God won't let you catch a fish on a Sunday because it's the Sabbath day. Oh, I guess that doesn't work, does it? Anyway, I'm glad to be here with you guys. I'm looking forward to a great time together here sharing today. Great day today, and really even in our future, just as far as a great future, as we're starting to see things really turn around. Politically, maybe it looks like it's kind of starting to settle in a little bit. We've got the COVID-19 vaccines that are going forward. So I think that we're on and moving in the right direction. And even if we're not, you know what? A positive attitude and an attitude of gratitude will always help you make it through it, won't it? So anyway, I'm thankful today. I hope you are too. Well, we're going to bounce back into the book of David. We haven't done that for 2 weeks. The life of David, the book of 2 Samuel. And so if you want to, get yourself something to drink, your coffee, your food, whatever it is you have, maybe a taco, and come on back and let's spend some time thinking together about this life of David as we'll be finishing it up today, and then we'll be moving forward into a new series that I'm going to do, and also some other voices when we're going to be talking about the covenants, the Old Testament covenants and the New Testament covenants. So I think it's going to be good. So anyway, get yourself your glass of water or whatever. I'm going to get mine, and then we're going to move forward here. All right. Well, the life of David. We have talked about the life of David, and we've talked about David when he was under Saul. We talked about David when he was king, and now we're talking about David as he's king. But a new addition to the chapter is his son Absalom has rebelled against him, and what happened now is Absalom is getting ready to try to overtake his father and take the kingdom. I've got to say that I think there would be nothing that would make a person more brokenhearted than to see their son and their daughter rise up against them to try to take the kingdom because of anger, resentment, rebellion, whatever the case might be. Now, I got to tell you, that kind of stuff happens all the time. But I think there's probably nothing more heartbreaking to a father or a mother than to have the betrayal of some of their children. Well, David's come into this as we studied the last lesson on the life of David. When Absalom rebelled, and you remember we talked about that he presented himself as this person other than he was. And then he sat at the gates and he would say, if I were king, this is what I would do. But David and his emissaries are going to do nothing for you. And so it says that Absalom stole the heart of the people. And then with that, you remember that Absalom then went and it said he's going to make a vow to God, and it was a lie that he made to David. And he left, and when he left, he went to another city, and there he proclaimed himself king. And also some of David's right-hand person, spiritually speaking, defected and went along with Absalom. So what happened after that, and getting up into what I want to talk about today, is of importance when we think about the life of David. Now, I want to say that I think that what we spend a lot of time doing when we read the Bible is we try to read it too fast. And we don't read into it necessarily the emotion of what's being said. I think one of the things as we become adults that gets stolen from us that we had when we were children is the idea of our imagination. And the idea that our imagination is so powerful. And when we live within inside of our imagination, it's like living a real world. When you see a child and they're dressed up as a princess, they absolutely believe they're a princess. And they want to wear those clothes and they love those clothes and they're playing the part. And what happens a lot of times is a parent will scold them or not let them wear them or whatever the case might be. And what you do is you still the child's imagination away. Well, I think that in evangelicalism and with the idea of the Bible only, or what they would call sola scriptura, that I think we've gotten to where that we've had to read the Bible so literal that, man, it's almost like it's like reading a science manual. There's like no imagination there. There's just a bunch of formulas in how somebody should live their life. But that's not how the Bible's meant to be lived. The Bible's meant to be lived in relation with you, God, the scriptures, and your conscience, where God speaks to you. That's what really Martin Luther meant by sola scriptura. Not this other stuff we have that has been an offshoot of that, of the literalcy of the Bible, and it's got and everything that kind of goes along with some of those trappings. Because what happens is that stuff just takes away the imagination, the imaginative of where God's revelation could come to us. So kind of going back to David, I want us to think about this story, and I want you to use your imagination when we get to this short text that I'm going to read. But what happened after Absalom left and declared himself king? Well, after that, what happened is that when David got word of that, David knew that Absalom was going to come after him. He knew his son. He knew that in the heart of his son had the ability to betray him and also to kill him and to take the throne by force. So David's in a precarious position here. Now, the reason that David's in a precarious position is because remember that David had this worldview or this principle, I guess really a principle, one of his founding principles and what he lived his life by, is to not touch the Lord's anointed. Remember back in the life of Saul that he wouldn't touch the Lord's anointed? And so Saul was pursuing David, and David refused to kill Saul. And so David, having this principle in his life, one of the foundational principles, it's like David understands that with Absalom coming, that Absalom doesn't live by that principle. Absalom is going to try to take the throne by force, and yet David doesn't know this. David doesn't know whether he's been disqualified from being king because of what he did with Bathsheba and the way that he treated his familial relationships, or whether or not God still wanted him to be the king. That meant that David didn't know whether or not God wanted Absalom to be king and for David to descend from the throne. So David's got this dilemma that's happening in him. And he's questioning the fact of, am I really to be the king now? Or has God removed his anointing from me the same way he removed his anointing from Saul? Now, one could argue, well, with the Davidic covenant, that wouldn't be so. But that doesn't mean it wasn't in the back of David's mind. The second thing is David saying, if I stay here, I'm going to have to fight and kill my own son. With that said, David makes a decision. And he is brokenhearted, and his people are brokenhearted. And David decides to leave Jerusalem with him and his family and his mighty men and other people that were loyal to him and that wanted to travel with him. But it was not a day where they just simply were. It wasn't a day of feasting at all. It was a day of mourning. It was a day of grieving. It wearied them, number one, to leave Jerusalem and to realize that the kingdom that was set up by God and given by God was now under assault by this young man, Absalom, that was birthed out of the very loins of David. I want to ask you the question of, what do you think it is, as I read this text, what is it do you think that it is that David felt when he was going through this? I mean, what were the feelings that he felt? It wasn't just this sterile text that we read, and I know we read it sometimes that way, but man, David's got to be brokenhearted and he's got to be exhausted, and the text really kind of indicates that. David also at this time doesn't know who's loyal to him and who's not loyal to him. But the one thing that is profound about David that David understands, and the most profound lesson is this, that whatever God gives you, you don't have to fight for it because God will fight for you. But sometimes you might find yourself fighting for the very thing that God doesn't want you to have. And so it's a very slippery slope because sometimes as Christians, we claim every promise, right? It's in the Bible, it says, every promise in the Bible is mine. Every promise in the Bible is mine. There's this song that we sing about, every promise in the Bible is mine. And you hear preachers up there and people talk about, I claim this promise. I'm claiming these promises. And sometimes we don't know if God's promised it to us or not, and in what context God promises something to us. And so the idea is that David's not completely sure. And at times in our life, we shouldn't be completely sure of what it means when God says he promises something to us, because what he means by that term and what we mean by that term might be two very different things. So David's caught in a quandary. He knows that God has promised through the covenant relationship and the covenant that God initiated with David. He knows that God has promised that somebody from his loins wouldn't depart from that throne for eternity, or well, for forever. And so he knew that Absalom was from his loins, so the one thing he wasn't sure is whether or not Absalom was the right one to ascend the throne or not, and whether or not God had anointed him and not anointed David. So David, in the midst of this, decides to do the exact same thing that he did with Saul, not to pick up a sword against him. David was not going to go out and go to battle and kill his son. So David, instead of doing that, he chose to leave Jerusalem and brokenhearted and giving up the throne and leaving it into the hands of God and letting God decide between Absalom and himself. A lot of times what we want to do is we want to fight for the things. We want to fight for those things that we demand or think that are ours or demand that we should have because we're children of God or whatever the case might be. But David wasn't that kind of a person. Because David knew that no matter what the circumstance was, that God was still ultimately in control. It didn't matter what the political climate was. It didn't matter what his family climate was or what his friends were thinking. What simply mattered is what God thought. And the fact that God was present and in the fact that God had always heard his prayer, David was willing to entrust himself to a loving God, not knowing if he would live or die or have a kingdom ever again. That's where David's very profound. But the story gets worse. So David is at the bottom, so to speak. I don't think that there was probably a time in his life where David was probably more depressed than the present time as he's leaving Jerusalem. Apparently he's lost his kingdom. He's lost his son. The very son that he lost is now seeking his life and seeking the kingdom. Half of the people, or most of the people, had gone with Absalom. He had lost his friends. He had lost the loyalty of the nation. And he left with his family, his warriors, and a cadre of people that would choose to walk with him. But as we pick up the story as David is now leaving Jerusalem. And as he's leaving Jerusalem, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, if you go out, there's a gate that you go out, I think it's the Eastern Gate. And as you go out, the Mount of Olives is there. And you go out and down this gate, which is the gate of the sacrifice, ironically, and where the sacrifice was. And David comes out this gate of the sacrifice, and he starts to ascend up this Mount of Olives. Remember where Jesus prayed, the Gethsemane prayer, where he would go away to pray. And David's going up this hill as he's leaving Jerusalem, and he has this group following him. And so this man from Saul's family, a Benjamite, as it was called, Shimei, decides that he's going to add insult to injury. He's going to go out, he's going to curse David in front of David's family, his warriors, his friends, his servants, and his loyal followers. But the question is here, as we read this text, is what is it that David's going to do? How is it that David's going to respond at the lowest point in his life to someone who sees him as nothing more than a worthless bloodthirsty and guilty man. So we're going to pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 16. And it'll be a short read, but if you'll stay with me, I think you'll find it to be a very interesting and tale-telling story. It picks up in verse 5, and it reads as follows. When King David came to Barim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And he came out cursing continually as they came. And he threw stones at David, and all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were at his right side and his left. Then Shimei said, when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow, for the Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head. But the king said, what have I to have to do with you, O son of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord had told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? Then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my son, who came out from my womb, came out from me, seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Behold, the Lord will look on my affliction, and return good to me, instead of his cursing this day. So David and his men went on the way, and Shimei went along the hillside parallel with him, and as he went, he cursed, and cast stones, and threw dust at him. The king and all the people who were with him arrived weary, and he refreshed himself there. That's quite a story, isn't it? It's quite a story because here's this man who is a mighty warrior, who's a king, who has mighty men that can take this man's life at any time. And here this young, I guess maybe young, here's this member of the household of Saul, cursing and swearing and cussing at David and calling him worthless. But in the midst of that, you can still again begin to see David's spirit. Now remember that when David started his journey, he started his journey in trusting God. He was a shepherd boy that trusted himself or trusted God in the midst of the battle with Goliath, when Goliath rose and hurled insults at the nation of Israel and at the living God. David at that time said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? I'll go out and fight him. And he went out and fought Goliath. And he went out and fought Goliath with a stick and a sling and 5 stones. After that, when he ascended, or when Saul ascended the throne and he went to work for Saul, under Saul, when Saul was the king, and the king sought to kill David, and he threw spears at him, David eluded from the spears, but never picked up a spear to throw it back. And then remember when Saul was pursuing him in the caves, and there was several different times when David could have killed Saul, but in both cases he said, who am I that I should touch the Lord's anointed? David all the time, always in going through and rising to the kingdom, David knew that God was the one that would give him the kingdom, and God would be the one that would take it from him if he so choose. But his motive, his view, his value was that he would never raise a hand against those that could possibly be the Lord's anointed. The same thing is why he didn't do it with Absalom. But Absalom was now the king. Saul was a king. David was a king when all those things happened in the past in David's life. But now David is dealing with a servant, with a man with no power, a man that David could easily have destroyed and nobody would have thought otherwise about it. They wouldn't have even lost a meal over it or a wink's sleep because he was simply just a man that was cursing David. And finally, after this man cursed David and David took it, Abishai said, why don't you let me go over and just take the head off this guy? I'm sick and tired of the fact that he's barking at you the way that he is. And David looks at him and says, what have I to do with you? There's no way I'm going to go do that. How do I know that the Lord hasn't sent him to curse me? And if God sent him to curse me, who am I to lift a hand against the Lord's anointed, whether he blesses me or he curses me or is in authority over me? Who am I to defend myself in that position? David said from that time, let him be. And perhaps the Lord will look upon me in my affliction, in your affliction, and bring me back to the throne in Jerusalem. You see, David learned the lesson, and a lesson we can learn from him is any position that we have in God, God gave us. As long as we're faithful to that position and we're not derelict and we do what we're supposed to do, God will be the sustainer of us. And if other people come and try to take it away from us, and even if they do take that position away from us, God will be faithful to us and take us where we have to go because God has anointed us. The second thing is when people attack us, when people are coming at us, whether it's a family member or a friend, whether it's somebody that's cursing us that has very little significance in our life. Rather than trying to argue with them, kill them, and defeat them, maybe we need to just recognize that perhaps the Lord's anointing is upon them to curse me, so that it will do something in me. Their swearing at me and throwing dirt at me will make me examine my heart, where I'll simply say, Father, I don't know what this is about, but I'm not going to touch him. But I'm going to look to you and ask that in my affliction and in this disgrace that this person is hurling upon me, I'm going to trust you, and perhaps you will restore me. You see that whenever we leave restoration to God, God will always bring it about. But whenever we try to do it for ourselves, we're never sure if it's our strength or God's strength. I just have to ask you the question is, are there areas of your life that need restoration, that need repair, that need healing, that need attention? All I would have to say is that in the midst of people cursing you and cussing at you and throwing dirt at you, or having problems at work or financial problems or at home because of what's going on, if you just simply look to God and say, no matter what's going on, I don't know what's going on around me, but I know that you're the restorer of my soul, that he'll do it. It's a matter of the fact that David, through all of his life, learned that at the end of the day, that God would restore everything if he left it to God. But if he did it in his own power, in his own strength, it wasn't going to happen. So I guess my question to you today is will you trust God to be the restorer of your life, to be the restorer of your soul? I think that's the end of the story of David. In the beginning, he began worshiping and praising and trusting God. And at the end, even when David died, he knew that God had been good to him, even when he hadn't been that good to God. I hope you've learned that. I hope that today you'll say yes to letting God restore you, to getting your hands off of fighting the battle for yourself, and letting God take over. And when you rest in him, you'll find a peace that you've never known before, and a faithful God that will do all that he's promised. Thank you for joining me today. God bless you, and have a great rest of the week.